you got into a back and forth with Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire on the
Yeah.
topic of trans people. And over the last year, if you've watched Trump rallies, CPAC, and other places, the overtly homophobic and anti-trans rhetoric is some of what's getting people the most excited when there's a crowd there of the folks that
Yeah.
go to these types of events. Something about it is really getting people excited. The right loves to say, plain and simple, we're just scientifically correct on this trans issue. There's men and there's women, and that's it. And just sort of anything else is kind of like cultural stuff, social stuff, woke stuff, which you can do, but it's outside of the realm of science. Where do you think the most fundamental scientific mistake is being made by the right on this issue?
I mean, the scientific mistake is that they ignore science, right? Boy's penis, girl's vagina is not science. That's what you learn when you're 5, right? But that's not, right? That's not science. Human sexuality, human physiology is exceedingly complex. And all this is on the right is just a dog whistle, right? Nothing unites people like a common hatred, and people fear what they don't understand. So I, like everyone else 10 years ago or whatever it was, had to have that moment where I went, oh, trans people, okay, that's a thing. But I don't understand why the right didn't learn anything from the homophobia, the huge wave of homophobia, 40 years ago or whatever it was, a little bit before my time. But when society had to adjust to the fact that homosexuality is a thing, and it's not boy and girl make baby and that's how humans are, right? Homosexuality exists, and also sexuality is on a spectrum and all these things. Gender is the same way, and they hide behind all these false narratives. So every time I try to talk about this, somebody says, you think there's 76 genders or something like this. Never said anything like that. It's just about the differences between sex and gender, right? Sex being largely chromosomal and related to the primary sexual characteristics, the external genitalia, and gender identity being something that's a neuroanatomical construct, right? There's such a thing as having the experience of being male or female, and that's intimately linked to brain structure, right? Masculinization and feminization occurs in the brain just as it does in the rest of the body to produce secondary sexual characteristics, et cetera. And when sex and gender don't align, that's a trans person. And that's all it is. So I tried to make some content explaining what trans people are scientifically. And I did so for the layperson at first, and actually expected to get a little bit of flack from the left because I sort of defended Dave Chappelle and said, oh, yes, he said some problematic things, but ultimately he's not a bigot and he's just confused. He doesn't know the difference between sex and gender. So let me help try to explain this. And just the onslaught from the right was astounding. I've never experienced anything like it. And so in my response, I cited papers. Here are papers studying gender identity, sexuality, all of these aspects of human physiology and behavior as they are linked to certain areas of the brain. Now, I'm not an expert in it, but when the title of the paper says gender identity as correlating with the uncinate nucleus or whatever part of the brain it is, people are studying this. I don't know the status of the field. I could dig into it more and do content on that if people are interested, but this is science. When you don't cite any primary literature and you deny the primary literature that the other side is citing, you're not pro-science. You're denying science. And there's science behind gender identity, sexuality, all these things that the right regularly ignores. That's all there is to it.
It also does seem as though there's a concerted effort from the right to focus in on a sliver of the entire issue, which if we think about it like concentric circles, you've got all possible gender topics, and then you've got trans people within that. And then within that, you have trans people in sports, but that's not even really the issue because they don't really seem that concerned about trans men, right? And they also don't seem that concerned about all sports. Like, for example, chess has women's and men's divisions, but it's not become controversial if a trans person wants to be in a different, right? So they're basically talking about like weightlifting and swimming, and only when it comes to trans women. This is like the tiniest sliver of the totality of the issue.
And it's a shame because we should be able to have good faith conversations about those things. It is a problem, what we do with trans people in sports.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I did in the first video where I was trying to admit that, there is something to talk about here. But they're not interested in talking about the dignity of trans people or even acknowledging that trans is a thing that you can be, right?
Right.
They just want to go towards, they're having surgeries on children and this is no, they're not. No, they're not. they're not doing that. That's not a thing that's happening. Nobody is undergoing medical procedures as a prepubescent child. That has happened 0 times. So it's just a way for them to garner political support by capitalizing on the fear and anger of confused people that don't want to accept what humans are. That's basically it.
It's also weird how obviously absurd things slip into the lexicon where, like, for example, for a little while it was puberty blockers on 5-year-olds. Was like 5-year-olds aren't about to go through puberty. Why would you need to do that? Or prepubescent girls are having double mastectomies. They don't have breasts. What are you removing?
How does that work? Yeah, it's just so blatantly false at face value. How can anybody listen to this and keep a straight face?
Yeah.
It's just a narrative. It's just a narrative that they're pushing. That's all there is to it.